Unsolicited advice.
What you whispering for? Yo, what's unsolicited advice? Take it or leave it. Yeah, if you caught my last video about dating on a budget, and you made it this far, at this point, you're doing what I call PB. I call it a PBI, performing for basic human interaction. So this means that you're overcompensating in personality to get someone's attention. You know, you're doing mental gymnastics to try to figure out what's going to get this lady or this man's attention. You know, so, you know, you suddenly become funnier, louder, or more confident than usual, you know, when women or men are around. You know, you're acting like the alpha, or you're acting like, you know, the main chick or whatever, even if it's not your natural vibe. You know, you're talking about money, cars, or job titles more than usual. You know, you're name dropping achievements in casual conversations. You know, you're picking expensive venues for hangouts just to be seen as date worthy. You know, boyfriend or female material. You're just doing something, you know, all this stuff is stuff that you wouldn't normally do. It's not necessarily who you are. But like I said, you're performing for basic human interaction. You're doing this because you're trying your best to get someone you like's attention. You know, maybe they're just not, they don't look like they're amused by you. So now you got to do all this extra stuff to prove that you're worthy. Agreeing with everything she says or he says to avoid friction, laughing at jokes, you know, that usually ain't that funny, just to stay in their good graces. Avoiding expressing, you know, personal opinions, even if they're unpopular, because, you know, like I say, you don't want to rub them the wrong way, you know. And then, you know, when all else fails, you start you start bringing in your physical presentation, you know. You adjust your posture, your voice, you know, your walk, your talk, you know, especially if a man or a woman that you like enters the room, you know. For women, I think they get to touching their hair. For men, I think they get to smoothing their clothes out, make sure there ain't no wrinkles. You know, some guys, they like to flex a little bit, you know, to try to show off muscles. You know, then, you know, if you really feel like a sucker for love, you're really into the person, then you got, you know, you forcing acts of helpfulness. You know, you're offering the help in an exaggerated way for basic things. Let me carry that, you know. Oh, no, I got this. Let me do that. You know, you're doing small favors that you would normally do for other points, you know, for other people, just to get, you know, brownie points with that person. You know, like it's just one of those things. You know, you want to start steering conversations. You want to push topics that you think will impress them. You know, you asking questions they don't care about, just to prolong the interaction because you feel like you're losing them. You know, to perform, you know, basic human interactions, you know, just to get someone's attention it screams of being desperate. You never want to put yourself in those positions. You know, you should always think of yourself highly, you know, higher than that. You shouldn't be, you know, doing more than that. But we're going to talk about why people fall into this pattern. It was heavy on my mind. I was thinking about that when I was doing that last video. I was like, man, I got to get back on and talk about it. Like I said, I'll be having a bunch of stuff in my head I we want to get out. So, let's just say if a man rarely gets attention from a woman, any small acknowledgement feels huge. You know, let's just say she hadn't been replying to his texts, and then she just randomly like, hey, you know, how you been? I've been busy. I really want to see you soon. Now all of a sudden, you know, that acknowledgement alone, he feels like he's conquered, but he hasn't. She just fuck with him when she fuck with him. This creates this creates what I like to call like a don't mess this up mentality, where you start getting in your head like, okay, all right, I'm back in the game, don't mess this up. It makes the interaction more about impressing the person instead of connecting, because you finally got their attention. So now you're just worried about messing it up instead of just saying, you know what, let's see if we even connect. Some people tie their self-worth to others' approval. They seek validation. Even non-romantic interactions can feel like an audition, for being seen as the ideal man or the ideal female. And as I always say, you have to deal with the social conditioning too of society. Many people grow up taught to be, a winner. You got to win that person over rather than, just going up and talking to them. It's like, no, don't just go up and talk to that person. Get that number. Don't leave until, you get that person. So, movies, media, dating advice, they often push the idea of performance. You got to charm, you got to have wit, you got to have confidence instead of just being authentic. Because we fear that our true selves will not be appreciated, that, people won't accept who we really are. We don't think that who we are, is cool enough or attractive enough or interesting enough, which leads to rejection. Rejection, that's just, it acts, when you're out there performing those basic human interactions, that acts as a shield. So if they reject you, at least it wasn't the real you. That was just somebody else, right? You see this in movies a lot. They'll do that, and then, close to the end of the movie, they'll reveal that, oh, this is who I am, and then they're like, oh, that's who you should have been all along. Yeah, okay, what the fuck ever. But, it's safer to risk rejection of a persona, than your genuine self. Because in reality, it hurts. It really, like, if you act how you really are and somebody rejects you, most of the time people will literally turn into a whole different person. Because it's like, I'll never be who I really am ever again. And people don't know how damn it, that's almost like having that identity disorder. This whole time you just a whole different person. It's like the movie The Joker, when he just felt like the world was just shitting on him. He was like, you know what? I'm gonna change my persona, and then this will get everybody's attention. This will make people respect me and love me and think that I'm something special. And then, of course, you overcompensate for insecurity. So insecure people, they often turn the dial up to like 11. Like they get extra. They joke more, the voice get louder, they show off more. So, because this is to cover your inner doubt. You the whole time you've been trying to win over people, and it hasn't worked. So now you feel like you gotta, I need to become this larger than life character, because this will get somebody's attention. This will get me to the dance. And I'm gonna tell you how people spot it. I'm gonna tell you how people spot when you act like this. They look at it as you being too eager, too responsive or too available. So they feel like you keep steering the discussion towards things that make you look impressive or desirable. And I spoke about that earlier, but I just wanted to hammer that home. They know what you're doing. Acting like, you're on stage. Were you just trying to, order some coffee? Just trying to do something basic. You trying to act like the world is your stage. And they see it. So that casual conversation, it starts to feel like an interview or a sales pitch. And then the physical cues. This is how they really know. Those physical cues, they get you every time. I'm trying to tell you, every time, that's what gets you caught up. They can tell if you're doing that nervous fidgeting or exaggerating your posture. Like I do that sometimes. Like I get nervous on here sometimes when I'm talking. It's like what they call it, like peacocking. like the peacock that spreads its wings. It's like that. You're doing extra stuff because you're nervous. You know, for guys, you know, their voice changes, you know, get a little deeper, you know, talk all, you know, a little slower, a little deeper, trying to talk sexually, you know. Or like you know, you're doing a scene in a movie or something. So you have to remember, if you have to do all this just to get someone's attention, that person's not worth your time. Trust me, the person that really likes you, you ain't got to do a whole lot. They like you. They already know who you are, and you don't have to prove who you are because they like you for who you are. And that's all that matters. So never waste all your time performing basic human action, basic human interactions with people that could care less. They're ignoring you. They have no interest in you. Fuck with who fucks with you. That's just my unsolicited advice. Bye.